A billionaire discovers black twins at an orphanage wearing his family necklace. As he investigates this mystery, what surprising connection will be uncovered? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Caldwell's penthouse, casting long shadows across the Italian marble floors. At 52, Ethan had built his real estate empire from the ground up, transforming the New York skyline with his signature glass and steel structures. Yet success had left him increasingly isolated, his days filled with board meetings and property acquisitions rather than meaningful connections. The call from James Morton, his old college roommate and now a prominent social worker, came during his morning coffee ritual. James's voice carried an unusual urgency. "Ethan, I know you're busy, but there's something at St. Margaret's orphanage you need to see. 2 kids, twins. Well, it's better if you see for yourself." Ethan's initial instinct was to decline. His schedule was packed with meetings about a new development in Manhattan's financial district. But something in James's voice, a mix of certainty and mystery, made him pause. James had never asked for anything like this before, despite their decades-long friendship. "These twins, what's so special about them?" Ethan asked, walking to his window overlooking Central Park. The autumn leaves below created a tapestry of red and gold. "Trust me on this one," James replied. "St. Margaret's. This afternoon. I'll clear your visit with Sister Catherine." The orphanage stood in stark contrast to Ethan's usual haunts. Located in a working-class neighborhood in Queens, the red brick building showed its age in the weathered stones and creeping ivy. The front yard, though modest, was well-maintained, with children's toys neatly arranged near a small playground. Sister Catherine, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and practical demeanor, met him at the entrance. "Mr. Caldwell," James called ahead. "The twins are in the art room. They spend most of their free time there." The interior of St. Margaret's was clean but worn. The walls displayed children's artwork and educational posters, creating a homey atmosphere despite the institutional setting. The scent of cleaning supplies mingled with the aroma of baking bread from the kitchen. As they approached the art room, Sister Catherine shared more details. "Maya and Malik came to us 3 years ago. They were 5 then. No record of parents or family. They're remarkable children, bright, well-behaved, though they keep to themselves mostly." The art room door stood open. Inside, 2 children sat at a table near the window, heads bent over their drawings. Their matching dark curls caught the afternoon light, creating halos around their concentrated faces. They worked in perfect synchronization, occasionally exchanging glances that seemed to carry entire conversations. Ethan stood in the doorway, not wanting to disturb their focus. Maya, the girl, was drawing what appeared to be an elaborate garden, while Malik sketched a building with surprising architectural detail for an 8-year-old. Their movements mirrored each other, despite working on different subjects. It was then that Ethan noticed it, the necklace around Malik's neck. The pendant caught the light, revealing an intricate design that stopped Ethan's breath. The craftsmanship was unmistakable, the pattern hauntingly familiar. Sister Catherine called out softly, "Maya, Malik, we have a visitor." The twins looked up in unison, their dark eyes intelligent and assessing. They didn't show the usual excitement children might display at meeting a visitor. Instead, they regarded Ethan with a calm curiosity that made them seem older than their years. "Hello," they said together, their voices creating a perfect harmony. And moved closer, trying to get a better look at the necklace without being too obvious. "Those are beautiful drawings. You both have quite a talent." Maya smiled slightly. "Thank you. Do you like to draw?" "No, but I design buildings." "Well, my company does." Ethan found himself speaking more gently than usual, his usual businesslike tone softening. Malik's hand went to the necklace, a seemingly unconscious gesture. "Like this one." He held up his drawing, which Ethan now realized was a surprisingly accurate rendition of a Victorian-era mansion. "That's very impressive. Where did you see that building?" Ethan asked, his curiosity growing. The twins exchanged another of their meaningful looks before Malik answered, "We dream about it sometimes." Both of us. And the necklace? Ethan couldn't help asking. It's very unique. Maya reached over and touched her brother's pendant. The nice lady gave it to us. She used to visit every month. Used to? She stopped coming last year, Malik explained. But she told us to keep it safe, that it would help us find our way home someday. Sister Catherine interjected, an elderly woman. She never left her name, but she seemed to take a special interest in the twins. We assumed she might be a relative, but she never made any formal inquiries about adoption or guardianship. Ethan nodded, his mind racing. The pendant's design matched one he'd seen before, in an old photograph tucked away in his family's archives. But that was impossible. The original had been lost decades ago, or so the family story went. Do you remember anything else about the woman? He asked, keeping his voice casual. The twins shared another look. She smelled like lavender, Maya said. And she told us stories about a big house with a garden maze. And about the people who lived there, Malik added. She said they were waiting for us to come home. Sister Catherine touched Ethan's arm. Mr. Caldwell, might I have a word in private? In the hallway, she spoke in low tones. The twins have always been different. They share dreams, finish each other's sentences. Sometimes they know things they couldn't possibly know. We've had several potential adoptive families express interest, but something always falls through at the last minute. Ethan glanced back at the art room, where Maya and Malik had returned to their drawings. I'd like to visit them again, if that's possible. Sister Catherine smiled. Of course. James mentioned you might want to. He seemed quite certain you needed to meet them. As Ethan left St. Margaret's that afternoon, his mind was filled with questions. The pendant, the twins' strange knowledge of the house, the mysterious elderly visitor. None of it made sense. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled onto something significant, something that would change more than just his life. Back in his office at Caldwell Enterprises, Ethan couldn't focus on the stack of contracts awaiting his signature. The corner office on the 48th floor usually felt like his sanctuary, but today the modern furniture and contemporary art pieces seemed to mock the mystery he'd encountered at St. Margaret's. He dismissed his assistant for the day, waited until the outer office fell quiet, then unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. The leather-bound family album was thick with age, its pages yellowed and brittle. Ethan hadn't opened it since inheriting it from his father 5 years ago. The book carried the musty smell of history, and as he carefully turned the pages, fragments of his family's past emerged through sepia-toned photographs and carefully preserved documents. He found what he was looking for near the middle of the album. The photograph, taken in 1865, showed a woman standing before a Victorian mansion. She wore a high-necked dress typical of the period, but it was the necklace that drew his attention. Even in the faded image, the pendant's distinctive. Each pattern was unmistakable, the same intricate design he'd seen around Malik's neck at the orphanage. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he removed the photograph from its protective sleeve. The back bore an inscription in faded ink, Clara Caldwell, Willow Grove Estate, 1865. Below that, in different handwriting, the last photograph taken before her disappearance. His computer hummed to life as he began his search. Clara Caldwell had been his great-great-grandmother, but her story was rarely discussed in family gatherings. The official records showed she had married Thomas Caldwell, a successful merchant, in 1860. They had 3 children together before her mysterious disappearance in 1866. The family's wealth had originated with Thomas's business ventures, but it was Clara's dowry that had provided the initial capital. Ethan's research led him deeper into historical archives and genealogical databases. He ordered dinner at his desk, barely touching the expensive sushi as he pieced together Clara's story. She had come from a wealthy family in Virginia, bringing with her not only money but also a collection of valuable jewelry, including the pendant that now inexplicably resided at St. Margaret's Orphanage. As night fell over Manhattan, Ethan discovered something odd in the property records. Clara had purchased several parcels of land in her own name, unusual for a married woman of that era. These purchases were concentrated in an area just outside Richmond, Virginia, including one large estate that matched the house in the twins' drawing. The coincidence was too striking to ignore. Ethan pulled up current satellite images of the property. The mansion still stood, though it appeared abandoned. The surrounding land had been parceled off over the years, but the main house and several acres remained intact, technically still owned by a trust established in Clara's name. A knock at his office door startled him. The cleaning crew had arrived for their nightly rounds. Ethan glanced at his watch, nearly midnight. He'd spent hours pursuing this mystery, and yet he felt energized rather than tired. His phone buzzed with an email notification. The Historical Society in Richmond had responded to his urgent inquiry about Clara Caldwell. The message was brief but intriguing. They had additional materials about Clara in their archives, including personal correspondence and a diary that had never been fully cataloged. Ethan opened his calendar and began clearing his schedule for the next week. The development project in the financial district could wait. This felt more important, more personal than any business deal he'd ever pursued. Before leaving the office, he made one final search. The elderly woman who had visited the twins, there had to be a connection. He pulled up St. Margaret's visitor logs from the previous year, which Sister Catherine had reluctantly shared. The mysterious visitor had signed in monthly for almost a year, but the signature was illegible. However, the security camera still images showed a well-dressed elderly woman with striking white hair, carrying herself with unmistakable grace. Ethan enlarged one of the images, focusing on the woman's hands. There, barely visible, was a ring he recognized from another family photograph. The piece was supposed to have been sold decades ago to cover family debts during the Depression. His phone buzzed again, a text from James. "Did you figure it out yet?" Ethan replied, "Working on it." "Why did you really send me to meet those twins?" The response came quickly, "Because they've been drawing that house since they arrived. The same house that's been in your family's possession for generations. The same house you've never visited, despite owning it through Clara's trust." Ethan sat back in his chair, letting the implications sink in. The twins' drawing, the pendant, the mysterious visitor with a family ring. None of it could be coincidence. Clara Caldwell's story had been carefully buried by his family, but perhaps it was time for the truth to emerge. He made one final call before heading home. His private pilot would have the jet ready tomorrow morning for a flight to Richmond. As he gathered his things, Ethan caught his reflection in the office window. Behind him, the city lights twinkled like stars, but his mind was already in Virginia, at a mansion he'd never visited but now couldn't ignore. The security guard nodded as Ethan left the building. "Late night, Mr. Caldwell?" "Early morning tomorrow, actually," Ethan replied. "I'm taking a little trip to look into some family history." The guard smiled. "Sometimes you have to look back to move forward, sir." The words stayed with Ethan as his driver navigated the late-night traffic. He had built his career looking forward, always chasing the next deal, the next development. Now, for the first time, the past seemed more compelling than the future, and somehow, 2 8-year-old orphans held the key to unlocking it all. The Virginia countryside rolled past Ethan's rental car window, the autumn colors more vibrant than in Central Park. After landing in Richmond, he'd driven straight to the Historical Society, but the promised diary wouldn't be available until tomorrow morning. Unable to wait, he decided to visit Willow Grove Estate immediately. The GPS led him down increasingly narrow roads until he turned onto a gravel driveway nearly hidden by overgrown vegetation. Through gaps in the trees, he caught glimpses of gray stone walls and peaked roofs. The mansion emerged fully into view as he rounded the final bend, and Ethan had to stop the car. The building matched Malik's drawing with unsettling accuracy. Every architectural detail the 8-year-old had sketched was present. The asymmetrical facade, the corner turret with its cone-shaped roof, even the distinctive pattern of the second-floor windows. The only differences were the signs of decay: ivy climbing unchecked up the walls, missing roof tiles, windows darkened by decades of dust and neglect. Ethan parked in what had once been a circular driveway, now thick with weeds pushing through cracked pavement. The front steps creaked under his weight as he approached the entrance. The key from his father's safety deposit box turned smoothly in the lock, as if the door had been recently maintained despite the property's overall condition. The foyer still held traces of its former grandeur. Dusty crystal fragments from a fallen chandelier crunched beneath his feet. A broad staircase swept upward, its mahogany banister dull but intact. Sheets draped the furniture, creating ghost-like shapes in the dim light filtering through grimy windows. Moving deeper into the house, Ethan found himself following an instinct he couldn't explain. His footsteps led him past the formal dining room, through a butler's pantry, and into what must have been Clara's private study. Here, the air felt different, less stale, as if someone had been in this room more recently. The desk dominated the space, a massive piece carved from dark wood. Unlike the shrouded furniture in other rooms, it stood uncovered. A leather-bound book lay in its center, as if placed there deliberately. Ethan approached cautiously, his heart pounding. The book's cover bore no title, but when he opened it, he recognized Clara's handwriting from the photograph inscription. "My dearest children," the first page began, "if you are reading this, then the truth I have worked so hard to protect must finally be told. The pendant has found its way home, as I always knew it would." Ethan sank into the desk chair, his hands trembling as he turned the pages. Clara's story unfolded before him, each entry more extraordinary than the last. She wrote of Sarah, a free black woman who had saved her life during a fever in 1861. Their friendship had deepened despite the social barriers of the time, and Sarah had shared with Clara the truth about her family's spiritual traditions and the pendant's significance. The diary spoke of promises made, of a bond between families that transcended social conventions and blood ties. Clara had used her wealth and privilege to protect Sarah's family, establishing secret trusts and purchasing properties to ensure their safety. But there were forces working against them, including Clara's own husband, Thomas, who had discovered their arrangement. A noise from elsewhere in the house made Ethan look up sharply. Sunlight had shifted, casting long shadows through the study windows. He had been reading for hours, lost in Clara's account. The sound came again, footsteps on the floor above. Ethan tucked the diary into his briefcase and moved cautiously toward the stairs. The upper floor was darker, the windows here completely blocked by overgrown vines. He followed the sound to a bedroom that must have been Clara's. The door stood slightly ajar. Inside, the room appeared frozen in time. The four-poster bed still wore its faded curtains. A vanity held crystal bottles and tarnished silver brushes. But it was the painting above the fireplace that caught Ethan's attention. It showed two women, Clara, recognizable from the photographs, and another woman who must have been Sarah. They stood together in the mansion's garden, both wearing identical pendants. The diary had mentioned a painting, commissioned in secret and hidden away when Thomas's suspicions grew. Clara had written of a false back to the fireplace where she kept her most important papers. Ethan examined the fireplace carefully, finding the hidden catch exactly where she had described it. The compartment contained a stack of yellowed envelopes bound with faded ribbon. As he reached for them, a floorboard creaked behind him. Ethan spun around, but the doorway was empty. Yet he could have sworn he caught the scent of lavender, the same perfume the twins had mentioned. His phone buzzed, making him jump. A text from Sister Catherine. "The twins are asking for you. They say it's important." They've been drawing again. The garden this time, with two women walking among the roses. Ethan looked back at the painting, then at the letters in his hands. The top envelope was addressed to those who will come after, sealed with wax bearing an intricate design, the same pattern as the pendant around Malik's neck. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown gardens. From the bedroom window, Ethan could trace the remains of paths and flower beds, now choked with weeds. But there was something else, a pattern in the layout that tickled his memory. He pulled out his phone and opened the photo he'd taken of Maya's latest drawing at the orphanage. The garden paths in her drawing matched the ones below exactly, including a detail that wouldn't be visible from any window, the shape of a bird formed by the intersection of the paths, visible only from above. A design that appeared in none of the historical records or surveys Ethan had studied. A design that an 8-year-old girl who had never visited this place had drawn with perfect accuracy. The implications made Ethan's head spin. He needed to read those letters to understand what Clara had been protecting. But first, he needed to return to New York. The twins were waiting, and somehow they knew, they had always known, that he would find his way here. The orphanage looked different to Ethan as he pulled up 3 days after his Virginia trip. The brick building's weathered facade now seemed less institutional and more like a keeper of secrets. He carried Clara's diary in his briefcase, though he hadn't yet opened the sealed letters. Something told him those revelations needed to wait until he spoke with the twins. Sister Catherine met him at the entrance, her expression concerned. "They've been different since your last visit," she said, leading him inside. Or focused, if that's possible. They barely sleep, spending hours drawing and talking about the house. Maya keeps mentioning a garden with hidden paths, and Malik talks about a room full of important papers. Ethan's step faltered. He hadn't told anyone about finding Clara's study or the garden's unusual design. Have they had visitors? None. Sister Catherine stopped outside the art room. "Mr. Caldwell, in all my years here, I've never seen anything quite like this. It's as if your visit awakens something in them. They speak of things they couldn't possibly know, yet describe them with perfect clarity." The twins sat at their usual table, but instead of drawing, they were examining old photographs Ethan had brought from his office. They looked up in unison as he entered, their expressions serious beyond their years.
"You found it," Maya said.
It wasn't a question. "The study with the big desk," Malik added, "and the letters behind the fireplace." Ethan sat down across from them, placing his briefcase on the table. "How do you know about those things?" The twins exchanged one of their meaningful looks. Maya reached for her brother's pendant, touching it gently. "We dream about them." "About her, too."
"Clara.
She wants us to understand." "The lady who gave us the necklace said we would," Malik continued. "She said when the right person came, we would remember everything." Ethan removed Clara's diary from his briefcase, placing it carefully on the table. The twins didn't seem surprised to see it. "Do you know what's in here?" "Stories," Maya said, her fingers hovering over the leather cover without touching it. "About 2 families that became one. About promises that got broken and need to be fixed." "She writes about Sarah," Malik added. "About how they protected each other's children. About the garden they built together, with paths that make pictures when you look down from above." Ethan withdrew the stack of photographs he'd taken at Willow Grove. The twins sorted through them with familiar ease, as if they'd seen these images countless times before. They paused at the painting of Clara and Sarah, studying it intently. "The pendants were a pair," Maya explained, her voice taking on a teaching tone that seemed far too mature for her age. "Clara and Sarah each had one. They were supposed to be passed down, keeping the families connected. But something went wrong." "Thomas got angry," Malik continued, his small hand gripping his sister's.
"He didn't understand."
"He tried to separate them, but Clara had already made arrangements. She hid everything important and waited for the right time." Ethan leaned forward, his voice gentle. "What do you mean, the right time?" "For the families to be together again," they said in unison. Sister Catherine, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped into the room. "Perhaps they need a break. This seems very intense for children their age." But the twins shook their heads firmly. Maya spoke first. "We need to tell him about our dreams. About the room upstairs with the hidden door and the box beneath the floorboards." Ethan hadn't found any hidden door or box in his exploration of Willow Grove. "Which room?" "The nursery," Malik said. "Behind the wallpaper with the blue flowers. Clara put something there for the children who would come later. For us." The certainty in his voice sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He had seen that wallpaper, faded and peeling, in a small room off the main hall upstairs. He dismissed it as another empty space, but he hadn't thought to look behind the walls. "Tell me about your dreams," he said, pulling out a notebook. "Everything you can remember." For the next hour, the twins took turns describing their nighttime visions in remarkable detail. They spoke of conversations overheard through walls, of letters written by candlelight, of meetings in the garden maze where plans were made in whispers. They described the feel of the pendant's engravings, the smell of Sarah's healing herbs, the sound of Clara's footsteps on creaking floorboards. "The lady who brought the pendant," Maya said suddenly. "She told us to wait for someone who would understand. Someone who would know what to do with Clara's truth." "She said you would come," Malik added, looking directly at Ethan. "She said you were part of the story too, even if you didn't know it yet." Ethan thought of the elderly visitor with the family ring, her deliberate appearances at the orphanage, the careful way she had chosen these specific children to receive the pendant. None of it was coincidence. "Do you know who she was?" he asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. The twins shared another look before Maya answered. She said she was the keeper, that she'd been watching both families all this time, waiting for the right moment to bring them back together. "Both families," Ethan repeated softly. The implications of everything he'd learned, Clara's diary, the twins' impossible knowledge, the mysterious visitor's careful orchestration, were starting to form a pattern he could hardly believe. Sister Catherine cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Caldwell, might I suggest we continue this another day? The children need their rest, and I imagine you have much to process." But as Ethan stood to leave, Malik spoke again, his voice carrying that same strange certainty. "You'll come back tomorrow. There's more to find at the house." Clara left pieces of the story everywhere, waiting for the right people to put them together. "And we're the right people?" Ethan asked. Maya smiled, a knowing look that seemed to hold centuries of secrets. "We all are. That's why she chose us. That's why the pendant found its way home." As Ethan drove back to his office, his mind raced with possibilities. He needed to return to Willow Grove, to find that hidden door in the nursery. But more than that, he needed to understand why these two children seemed to hold the key to a mystery that had shaped his family's history for generations. His phone buzzed with a text from James. "Did they tell you about the dreams?" "How did you know they would?" Ethan replied. The response came quickly. "I didn't. But the woman who brought them to St. Margaret's did. She said to watch for someone asking about the pendant. She said everything would make sense when the right person found them." Ethan thought of the sealed letters in his briefcase, waiting to reveal their secrets. Whatever Clara had set in motion all those years ago was finally coming to fruition, and somehow, these two extraordinary children were at the center of it all. The morning meeting at Caldwell Enterprises started like any other, with executives gathered around the polished conference table on the 48th floor. But Richard Sterling's presence changed the atmosphere immediately. The rival developer sat at the far end of the table, his expensive suit and carefully styled gray hair presenting the perfect image of corporate success. He hadn't come alone. His lawyers flanked him on either side. "Let's cut to the chase, Ethan," Richard said, sliding a folder across the table. "Your financial district project is bleeding money. The environmental survey came back with issues, and the Historical Preservation Committee is asking questions. I'm prepared to take it off your hands, at a fair price, of course." Ethan barely glanced at the documents. His mind was still at Willow Grove, thinking about the hidden room the twins had described. "The project is proceeding as planned, Richard. If that's all, I have other matters to attend to." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Other matters? Like your sudden interest in that orphanage in Queens? Or perhaps your little trip to Virginia?" He paused, letting the implications sink in. "You've been distracted, Ethan. Your shareholders are starting to notice." The room fell a sigh.
Lent.
Ethan's executives exchanged worried glances. No one outside his immediate circle should have known about his visit to St. Margaret's or his trip to Virginia. He kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. How had Richard obtained this information? "My personal interests are just that, personal," Ethan replied evenly. "Caldwell Enterprises projects are proceeding according to schedule." Richard leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone that nonetheless carried to every corner of the room. "Are they? Because my sources tell me you've spent the last week digging through historical records instead of attending project meetings. And then there's the matter of your great-great-grandmother's estate." The mention of Clara made Ethan's pulse quicken, but he maintained his composure. "I wasn't aware my family history was of such interest to Sterling Development. Everything about the Caldwell family is of interest when it affects business." Richard nodded to one of his lawyers, who produced another folder. Did you know that Clara Caldwell's property acquisitions were never properly registered? There are irregularities in the documentation, enough to question the legitimacy of your family's claims to certain assets. Now Ethan understood. Richard hadn't come about the financial district project at all. Somehow, he'd learned about Clara's secret arrangements and saw an opportunity. If you're suggesting there are problems with century-old property titles, I'm sure our legal team would be happy to review them. It's more than property titles, Ethan. Richard's smile widened. It's about legitimacy. About who has the right to claim the Caldwell legacy. Those 2 children you've been visiting, have you figured out who they really are yet? The question hit Ethan like a physical blow. He thought of the twins' drawings, their impossible knowledge of Willow Grove, the mysterious elderly visitor who had given them Clara's pendant. I don't know what you're implying, Richard, but careful how you proceed. I'm implying nothing. I'm stating facts. Richard stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate slowness. Clara Caldwell didn't just disappear in 1866. She took something with her, something that could rewrite your family's entire history. Those children are part of a story you don't fully understand yet. But I do. Ethan's executive team watched the exchange with growing concern. His CFO started to speak, but Ethan held up a hand to stop her. How do you know about the children, Richard? The same way I know about the diary you found in Clara's study. The same way I know about the letters you haven't opened yet. Richard gathered his papers unhurriedly. Your great-great-grandmother wasn't the only one keeping records, Ethan. My family has been waiting for this moment for generations. The implications staggered Ethan. Your family? What connection could you possibly have to Clara? Ask yourself why I've taken such an interest in Caldwell properties over the years. Why I've been watching St. Margaret's. Why I knew exactly when those twins would appear. Richard moved toward the door, then paused. Read those letters, Ethan. Then we'll talk about the real price of keeping your family's secrets buried. After Richard left, Ethan's executives erupted into concerned discussions about shareholder confidence and project timelines. But Ethan barely heard them. His mind was racing through everything he knew about Richard Sterling's background, trying to find the connection he'd missed. His phone buzzed, a text from Sister Catherine. The twins are asking about a man named Richard. They say he's been watching the orphanage. They seem frightened, Mr. Caldwell. What's going on? Another message followed immediately, this one from James. Sterling was here. He tried to access the twins' files. Catherine stopped him, but he had documentation claiming a familial connection. Ethan, what Eve? R's going on. Those kids need protection. Ethan stood abruptly, silencing the ongoing discussion. Meeting adjourned. Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. He gathered his things, his decision already made. And get me everything we have on Sterling Development's history. Not just the company, the family. I want to know where they came from and how they built their fortune. As he rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Ethan's hand went to his briefcase, feeling the weight of Clara's sealed letters inside. Richard's threat had forced his hand. Whatever secrets those letters contained, whatever connection existed between Sterling and his family's past, he needed to understand it now. The twins were already in danger. Richard's visit to the orphanage proved that. Clara's careful plans, laid out over generations, were suddenly accelerating. And somewhere in those letters lay the truth about why 2 8-year-old orphans could draw a house they'd never seen, and know secrets that had been buried for over a century. The Richmond Community Center buzzed with anticipation. Ethan had chosen this venue deliberately, a restored 19th century building that had once served as a meeting place for both Black and white communities during Reconstruction. The symbolism wasn't lost on the gathered crowd, which included local historians, community leaders, and several reporters Ethan had personally invited. The letters had revealed everything. After spending a sleepless night reading Clara's correspondence, Ethan understood why Richard Sterling had been so interested in his family's history. The truth demanded to be shared, but it needed to be done carefully, respectfully, and in a way that honored both families' legacies. Maya and Malik sat in the front row beside Sister Catherine, both wearing their best clothes. The pendant gleamed at Malik's throat. They had insisted on being present, displaying a composure that continued to surprise everyone except Ethan. He now understood their connection to this story went far deeper than anyone had imagined. "Thank you all for coming," Ethan began, standing at the podium. Behind him, a projector displayed the photograph of Clara and Sarah in the Willow Grove garden. "What I'm about to share will change how many of you view not just the Caldwell family history, but the history of this entire region." He removed Clara's diary from his briefcase, along with the stack of letters. "In 1861, my great-great-grandmother Clara Caldwell fell ill with fever. A free black woman named Sarah Sterling saved her life using traditional medicines and knowledge passed down through her family. This meeting began a friendship that would reshape both families' destinies." The name Sterling caused a murmur through the crowd. Ethan saw several people checking their phones, undoubtedly making the connection to Richard's development company. In the back of the room, Richard himself stood watching, his expression unreadable. Clara and Sarah formed a bond that transcended the social boundaries of their time. Together, they created a network of safe houses and properties, using Clara's wealth and Sarah's connections to protect families escaping slavery. The pendant that many of you have asked about, he gestured to Malik's necklace, was originally a pair. Clara and Sarah each wore one as a symbol of their commitment to each other's families. Ethan clicked to the next slide, showing a series of property deeds. Clara used her position to purchase properties throughout Virginia and the surrounding states. On paper, these were Caldwell family investments. In reality, they were part of an elaborate system of protection and support for families seeking freedom. Sarah's knowledge of herbs and healing became a cover for an underground network of communication and safe passage. The historians in the audience were frantically taking notes. This was a previously undocumented piece of view. Underground Railroad history, supported by Clara's detailed records and correspondence. However, Clara's husband Thomas discovered the extent of their cooperation. Fearing for Sarah's safety and the exposure of their network, Clara made arrangements to protect both families' futures. She established a series of trusts and legal frameworks that were far ahead of their time, ensuring that the properties and resources she'd accumulated would benefit both families for generations to come. Ethan paused, looking directly at Richard Sterling. Some of those arrangements were hidden, preserved by chosen keepers in each generation. The Sterling family, Sarah's descendants, maintained their own records, watching and waiting for the right moment to reunite the family's legacies. Maya and Malik stood up together, moving to join Ethan at the podium. The room fell silent as the twins faced the audience. Maya spoke first, her voice clear and confident. "We've always known about the house, about Clara and Sarah. The dreams showed us everything." Malik touched his pendant. "The keeper brought us to St. Margaret's because she knew Mr. Caldwell would find us. She knew it was time for the families to be together again." Ethan placed a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. These remarkable children are the descendants of both Clara and Sarah. Their presence at St. Margaret's was no accident. The elderly woman who brought them there, who gave them the pendant, was the last of the keepers, ensuring that Clara and Sarah's final wishes would be fulfilled. The revelation caused another stir in the audience. Richard Sterling stepped forward, but his earlier hostility seemed to have vanished. Instead, he looked almost relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted. "I propose to honor Clara and Sarah's vision," Ethan continued. "Willow Grove Estate will be restored and transformed into a cultural center celebrating both families' histories. The properties Clara purchased will be used to establish educational and community support programs, jointly managed by the Caldwell and Sterling families." He turned to Richard. "Mr. Sterling, I believe we have a century and a half of cooperation to rebuild. Would you join us in making this vision a reality?" The room held its breath as Richard made his way to the podium. He looked at the twins, then at Ethan, before finally addressing the audience. "For generations, my family has protected our part of the story, waiting for the moment when the truth could finally be told. Clara and Sarah's dream was never just about protecting people during slavery. It was about creating a future where their families could acknowledge their shared history and purpose." Richard reached into his pocket and withdrew something that made the twins gasp, a pendant identical to Malik's. This belonged to Sarah. It's time it was reunited with its pair, just as our families are being reunited today. The event became more than just a historical revelation. As community members came forward with their own stories of properties that had sheltered their ancestors, as historians began piecing together the broader implications of Clara and Sarah's network, Ethan watched the twins. They stood between him and Richard, holding hands, their expressions peaceful. They had known all along that this day would come, had carried this knowledge in their dreams and drawings. The Keeper had chosen well. In bringing Maya and Malik to St. Margaret's, and ensuring that Ethan would find them, she had fulfilled a promise made generations ago. Clara and Sarah's legacy would not only be preserved but would continue to grow, bringing together families and communities in ways they could only have dreamed of. The weeks following the community center announcement brought unexpected challenges. Despite Richard Sterling's public show of support, a series of anonymous articles began appearing in local business journals, questioning the legitimacy of Clara's property arrangements and suggesting that Ethan's plans for Willow Grove were motivated by guilt rather than genuine reconciliation. Ethan sat in his office, reviewing the latest piece, a particularly pointed attack suggesting that the twins' connection to both families was manufactured for publicity. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from concerned board members and investors. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. James Morton arrived unannounced, looking troubled. "We got problems at St. Margaret's. Someone's been asking questions about the twins' arrival records. They're focusing on the elderly woman who brought them in, trying to prove she wasn't who he thought she was." Ethan leaned back in his chair, connecting the dots. Richard's playing both sides. His public support gives him credibility, while he works behind the scenes to undermine everything. He pulled up his email, showing James a message he'd received that morning. "Look at this," and offered to quietly resolve the situation by transferring Willow Grove to Sterling Development for restoration. "It's not just Richard," James said, placing a file on Ethan's desk. "I did some digging. There's a group of Sterling Development's major shareholders who've been meeting secretly. They're descendants of families who opposed Clara and Sarah's work during Reconstruction. They've been waiting for this moment too, but not for reconciliation." The revelation made a disturbing kind of sense. The opposition Clara and Sarah had faced hadn't simply disappeared. It had evolved, taken on new forms, waited for its own moment to resurface. Ethan opened the file, finding photographs of clandestine meetings and documents outlining a coordinated strategy to discredit both families' shared history. "Mr. Caldwell?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Sister Catherine is on line 1. She says it's urgent." The news from St. Margaret's sent Ethan and James racing to Queens. Someone had broken into the orphanage's records room overnight. Files were missing, specifically everything related to the twins' arrival and the elderly woman who had brought them. Sister Catherine met them in her office, visibly shaken. "There's more," she said, leading them to the art room. "All their drawings are gone. Every sketch of Willow Grove, every picture of the garden, even their recent ones of Clara and Sarah." She paused, her voice dropping. "But the strangest thing is the twins' reaction. They don't seem worried at all." Maya and Malik sat at their usual table, perfectly calm despite the chaos around them. When Ethan entered, they looked up with knowing expressions that still caught him off guard. Maya spoke first. "They can take the drawings, but they can't take the dreams. Clara made sure of that." Malik nodded, touching his pendant. "The Keeper told us this would happen. She said some people would try to make the truth disappear again, just like they did before. But the truth isn't in the papers or the pictures. It's in the land," Maya continued. "In the houses Clara bought, in the paths Sarah made, in the pendant and the promise they made to each other." She reached for her brother's hand. "And it's in us. They can't take that away." Ethan received another text, this one from Richard himself. "My partners are moving faster than I anticipated. They've forced an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. They're going to try to seize control of both the Willow Grove project and St. Margaret's property. I can't stop them alone." The twins spoke in unison, answering Ethan's unasked question. "Clara left something else. Something they don't know about." In the garden, beneath the bird. James looked confused, but Ethan understood immediately. The bird-shaped pattern in the garden paths, the one Maya had drawn with impossible accuracy, wasn't just decorative. It was a marker. Clara and Sarah had left one final safeguard. Buried where only those who truly understood their legacy would know to look. "How much time do we have?" Ethan asked James. "The board meeting's at 9 tomorrow morning. Whatever we're going to find, we need to find it tonight." Ethan turned to Sister Catherine. "The twins need to come with us to Willow Grove. I know it's irregular, but this is what the Keeper prepared them for. They're the only ones who can help us find what Clara and Sarah hid." Sister Catherine hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll come with you. These children have been entrusted to my care, and I want to understand what makes them so special." As they prepared to leave, more texts arrived, supporters rallying to their cause. Community members who had attended the announcement were spreading the word about the attempted takeover. Local historians were speaking out about the importance of preserving Clara and Sarah's legacy. The network of protection and support that the two women had built was still active, still ready to defend their vision. Maya and Malik gathered their few possessions, moving with purpose rather than urgency. They had known this moment was coming, had been prepared for it by the Keeper and by their own mysterious connection to the past. Whatever was hidden beneath the garden paths, they would help find it. "Richard isn't our enemy," Malik said suddenly as they walked to Ethan's car. "He's trapped between two sides, just like Clara was in the beginning. He needs us to help him choose the right path." "The Keeper showed him his pendant for a reason," Maya added. "But the other side of his family has been whispering to him too. That's why he seems to help and hurt at the same time." Their insight into Richard's conflicted position added another layer to the unfolding situation. The Sterling family's division mirrored the larger conflicts that Clara and Sarah had faced, the constant tension between those who sought reconciliation and those who preferred to keep old wounds open. As they drove toward Willow Grove, Ethan's phone continued to buzz with messages of support and warning. The story was spreading, drawing more people into the orbit of Clara and Sarah's legacy. Tomorrow's board meeting would determine more than just the fate of some properties. It would decide whether the truth Clara and Sarah had fought to preserve would finally be fully revealed or buried once again beneath layers of corporate maneuvering and historical revision. The twins sat quietly in the back seat, holding hands, their expressions peaceful despite the growing storm around them. They had been chosen for this moment, brought carefully to this point by forces set in motion generations ago. Whatever waited beneath the garden paths at Willow Grove, they would face it with the same quiet certainty that had guided them since their arrival at St. Margaret's. The night air at Willow Grove carried the scent of rain-dampened earth as Ethan, James, Sister Catherine, and the twins made their way through the overgrown garden. Maya and Malik moved with surprising confidence through the darkness, following paths only they could fully perceive. Their footsteps traced the outline of the bird pattern that Clara and Sarah had embedded in the garden's design generations ago. "Here," Maya said, stopping at what appeared to be the bird's heart in the path layout. Clara and Sarah buried their truth where the heart meets the earth. The ground beneath their feet seemed ordinary, but when Ethan shone his flashlight directly on the spot, a subtle pattern emerged in the arrangement of the paving stones. Malik knelt, his fingers finding invisible seams in the weathered surface. They made it so only the pendants together could show the way. Understanding dawned on Ethan. He pulled out his phone, calling Richard Sterling. Despite the late hour, Richard answered immediately. "We found something at Willow Grove. Your pendant, Sarah's pendant, Wien. Idiot here." Richard's voice carried both resignation and relief. "I'm already on my way. I've been sitting in my car outside the gates for the past hour, trying to find the courage to drive up. The board members, they've been threatening my family, using information they've held onto since Reconstruction." Within minutes, Richard's car lights illuminated the garden. He approached slowly, Sarah's pendant gleaming in his hand. The twins watched him with understanding rather than judgment, as if they had expected this moment of decision. Malik removed his pendant, and in the combined light of the two artifacts, held close to the ground, a previously invisible design blazed to life across the paving stones. The pattern matched markings on both pendants, creating a map that led them to a hidden compartment beneath one of the larger stones. Inside, they found a metal box, its surface etched with the same intricate designs as the pendants. The box contained documents that made Ethan's breath catch: original deeds, letters, and most importantly, a legal document dated just before Clara's disappearance that changed everything they thought they knew. Dawn was breaking as they gathered in Clara's study, reviewing the contents of the box. The documents revealed that Clara and Sarah had created a joint trust, legally binding their families' futures together in ways that were far ahead of their time. They had hidden the trust's existence, protecting it until a moment when the world might be ready for their vision of unity. "The board meeting starts in 2 hours," Richard said, examining the trust documents. "With these, they can't touch either property. The legal framework Clara and Sarah created is ironclad. They thought of everything, including the possibility of future attempts to separate their legacy." But Maya spoke up, her voice carrying that otherworldly certainty. "The papers aren't enough. They need to understand why Clara and Sarah did this. They need to see." She turned to her brother, who nodded and removed his pendant. Together, they placed both pendants on Clara's desk, arranging them to mirror the pattern they had found in the garden. The metal began to warm, then glow, casting shadows that danced across the study walls. The room filled with what could only be described as memories, not ghosts, but echoes of the past made visible through some mechanism Clara and Sarah had embedded in the pendants themselves. They watched Clara and Sarah planning in this very room, saw them creating their network of safe houses, witnessed their determination to build a future where their families would be united. "This is what the Keeper showed us in our dreams," Malik explained. "The pendants don't just mark the trust, they carry the truth of why it was created." Clara and Sarah knew some people would only see papers and property. They wanted their descendants to understand the heart of their promise to each other. Richard stood transfixed by the images of his ancestor, Sarah, working alongside Clara to create something revolutionary for their time. The conflict that had torn at him, between his family's legacy of protection and the pressure from board members holding onto old prejudices, seemed to resolve itself as he watched. "I've been a coward," he said quietly, "trying to play both sides, letting fear of those old families control my actions. Sarah and Clara showed more courage in their time than I have in mine." Ethan checked his watch. "The board meeting starts in 90 minutes. Are you ready to stand with us, Richard? To finish what Clara and Sarah started?" Richard squared his shoulders, a decision visibly crystallizing in his bearing. "More than ready. Those board members think they're protecting some old order, but they're just holding on to shadows. It's time for the Sterling and Caldwell families to be what Clara and Sarah intended, partners in building something better." The twins gathered. The documents and pendants, their movements sure and purposeful. Maya looked up at the adults with an expression that held both childhood innocence and ancient wisdom. "The Keeper chose this time for a reason. The world is ready now, even if some people aren't." Clara and Sarah knew their truth would need both families working together to protect it. As they prepared to leave for the board meeting, Sister Catherine watched the twins with new understanding. All this time at St. Margaret's, they were waiting for this moment. The Keeper didn't hide them there. She placed them exactly where they needed to be for their families to find them again. The morning sun painted Willow Grove in shades of gold as they drove away, the estate seeming to awaken from a long sleep. In Ethan's briefcase, Clara and Sarah's documents lay protected, ready to be revealed to those who had sought to bury their legacy. But the real power wasn't in the legal papers. It was in the truth the pendants had shown them, in the dream of unity that had waited generations to be fulfilled. Maya and Malik sat quietly in the back seat, holding hands as always, but now their peaceful expressions carried a hint of anticipation. They had moved beyond being mere children caught in a historical mystery. They were living bridges between past and present, chosen by the Keeper to help their families remember and reclaim a legacy of courage, cooperation, and hope. The transformation of Willow Grove Estate into the Clara and Sarah Heritage Center took exactly 1 year from the momentous board meeting. The renovation preserved the mansion's historical character while creating modern spaces for education, community gatherings, and historical research. The garden had been restored following the original designs, the bird pattern in its paths now clearly visible to all visitors. On the morning of the inauguration, Ethan stood in Clara's study, now meticulously restored to its 1865 appearance. The past year had brought dramatic changes to both the Caldwell and Sterling families. After the board meeting revealed the full scope of Clara and Sarah's trust, along with the attempts by certain board members to suppress it, both companies had undergone significant restructuring. Richard Sterling had emerged as a dedicated partner, working alongside Ethan to fulfill their ancestors' vision. Maya and Malik had remained at St. Margaret's during the renovation, but their status had changed. Regular visits to Willow Grove had strengthened their connection to both families' histories, and their unique ability to understand the estate's past had proved invaluable during the restoration. They had helped locate several more hidden caches of documents and artifacts, each one adding depth to Clara and Sarah's story. The inauguration ceremony would bring together hundreds of people, community members, historians, descendants of families helped by Clara and Sarah's network, and representatives from both the Caldwell and Sterling enterprises. But first, there was one private meeting that would change everything. Sister Catherine led an elderly woman into the study. Her white hair was elegantly styled, her bearing dignified, but it was her eyes that caught Ethan's attention. They held the same knowing look he had come to recognize in the twins. Maya and Malik, sitting on the window seat, stood as one when she entered. "My name is Eleanor," the woman said, though they all knew who she was. "I was the keeper before these little ones were chosen." She moved to the twins, touching their faces gently. "Your parents, my son and his wife, they understood the importance of what Clara and Sarah created. When they realized they wouldn't live to guide you, they entrusted you to me." The twins showed no surprise at this revelation. "We remembered you in our dreams," Maya said softly. "Not just from St. Margaret's, but from before, when we were very small. The fever that took your pair. Entis came so suddenly," Eleanor continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "I had to make sure you were protected until the right time, until both families were ready to remember and reclaim their shared legacy. St. Margaret's was part of Clara and Sarah's network, one of the many places they created to shelter those in need of protection." Malik touched his pendant. "You gave us this, so we would understand when the time came." Eleanor nodded. "The pendants do more than mark the trust. They carry memories, knowledge passed down through generations. Clara and Sarah imbued them with their own experiences, their hopes for the future. When joined together, they show us not just what was, but what could be." She turned to Ethan and Richard, who had entered quietly during her explanation. "Your families were never meant to be separate. Clara and Sarah knew their work would face opposition, that some would try to erase what they built. They created the keeper's role to preserve their truth until the world was ready for it. Why didn't you tell us everything from the beginning?" Richard asked, though his tone held no accusation. "The truth had to be discovered, not simply told," Eleanor explained. "Each generation faces its own challenges, its own choices. Maya and Malik needed to find their way to their heritage, just as you needed to find your way to understanding your family's shared purpose." The sounds of arriving guests filtered through the windows. Soon, the formal ceremony would begin, marking the public reunion of the Caldwell and Sterling legacies. But this moment, the recognition of Eleanor's role as keeper, the revelation of the twins' direct connection to both families, was private, sacred in its own way. "There's one more thing Clara and Sarah left for today," Maya said, moving to the fireplace. Her fingers found a hidden catch that even Eleanor hadn't known about, revealing a small compartment containing 2 sealed envelopes. The first envelope contained a letter, written in Clara's hand but signed by both Clara and Sarah. It spoke of their hope that future generations would understand that their work was about more than protecting people from slavery. It was about creating a new kind of family, one built on choice and commitment rather than just blood. The second envelope held legal documents, dated the day before Clara's supposed disappearance. They were adoption papers, showing that Clara and Sarah had legally bound their families together. each adopting the other's children in secret. The papers had been filed in multiple jurisdictions, using Clara's network of sympathetic officials to ensure they wouldn't be destroyed. "We were never just allies," Eleanor said, reading the documents. "We were always one family from the very beginning. The separation was artificial, created by those who feared what Clara and Sarah had built." The twins stood together by the window, sunlight creating halos around their dark curls, just as it had the day Ethan first met them. But now he understood fully why they had seemed so familiar, why their connection to Willow Grove had felt so natural. They were the living embodiment of Clara and Sarah's dream, the union of both bloodlines, protected and guided until the moment when their families could be openly reunited. Outside, guests were gathering in the restored garden. Soon, they would all hear the full story of Clara and Sarah's legacy. The Heritage Center would stand as a testament to their vision, a place where history could be honestly confronted and new connections forged. But first, this smaller family circle needed to absorb the final pieces of truth that had waited so long to be revealed. Eleanor reached out, taking one of each twin's hands in hers. Clara and Sarah knew this day would come. They saw it in their dreams, just as Maya and Malik see it in theirs. The keeper's role is ending because it's no longer needed. The truth do. The Ascent need to hide anymore. The morning sun streamed through the study windows, illuminating the gathered group, Caldwells and Sterlings, no longer separated by the artificial barriers of the past. In her restored study, Clara's presence felt almost tangible, as if she and Sarah were watching their long-held dream finally come to fruition. The Heritage Center's inaugural ceremony was in full swing when Richard's former board members made their final desperate move. They arrived as a group, led by Harrison Wells, the eldest member of Sterling Development's old guard. Their timing was deliberate, waiting until the main hall was filled with guests and media representatives. "This entire project is built on lies," Harrison announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed room. He held up a stack of documents. "We have proof that Clara Caldwell's disappearance wasn't what you all think. She didn't vanish to protect Sarah Sterling. She fled to escape prosecution for fraud." Ethan started to step forward, but Maya and Malik moved first. The twins walked calmly to the center of the room, their presence commanding attention despite their young age. Eleanor watched from nearby, her expression serene, as if she had expected this moment. "You're right about one thing," Maya said, her clear voice reaching every corner of the hall. "Clara's disappearance wasn't what people think, but the fraud wasn't hers." Malik continued seamlessly. "Thomas Caldwell and his allies tried to steal what Clara and Sarah built. They forged documents, just like the ones you're holding now. They thought if they could make Clara disappear, they could erase everything she and Sarah created." Harrison's confidence wavered. "These records are from Sterling Development's private archives. They prove that your ancestors helped Thomas try to destroy Clara and Sarah's legacy," Richard interrupted, stepping forward. "I found the real records last week, hidden in the company vault. Letters between Thomas and your great-grandfather, planning how to separate our families and bury the truth." The twins moved in perfect synchronization, each taking one of the pendants they wore and holding them up. In the bright lights of the hall, the artifacts began to glow just as they had in Clara's study. Images formed in the air between them, not just memories this time, but proof. They showed Thomas Caldwell and his conspirators creating false documents, planning to use the law and social prejudices of their time to tear apart what Clara and Sarah had built. "Clara didn't disappear," Eleanor explained, her voice carrying the weight of generations of keepers. "She transformed. When she realized what Thomas was planning, she and Sarah enacted the final part of their plan. Clara Caldwell became Caroline Sterling, Sarah's supposedly long-lost cousin. They lived together openly, raising their children as one family, while their husbands thought they had won." The revelation rippled through the crowd. Harrison started to speak again, but Maya's voice cut him off. "Look at the pendants. Look at what really happened." The glowing images shifted, showing Clara's transformation, her life with Sarah, the careful way they had preserved their truth while hiding it from those who would destroy it. The proof was undeniable, encoded in the pendants themselves through means that even now remained mysterious. "That's why the Keeper brought us to St. Margaret's," Malik said. "We're not just descendants of both families. We're proof that Clara and Sarah's plan worked. Their bloodlines didn't just cross once. They've been intertwined for generations, protected by the Keepers until the world was ready to understand." Harrison Wells and his allies found themselves facing not just legal documents, but living history. The pendant's light revealed more than just the past. It showed the subtle markers of Clara and Sarah's shared bloodline in the faces of man. Why present, including Harrison himself. "You're not just fighting us," Richard told his former board members. "You're fighting your own heritage." Clara and Sarah made sure their descendants would be part of both families, even if we didn't know it. The division between Caldwell and Sterling was always artificial, a lie created by men who couldn't accept what these two remarkable women built. The twins spoke together, their voices harmonizing as they revealed the final truth. "The Keeper didn't choose us because we connect the families. She chose us because we could help everyone remember that the families were never truly separate." Every person in this room who traces their ancestry to either Clara or Sarah is part of both bloodlines. Eleanor stepped forward, her role as Keeper coming to its end with this final revelation. Clara and Sarah knew their husbands would try to erase their work, so they made sure it could never be fully undone. They wove their families together so tightly that no amount of false documents or buried records could separate them. The pendants don't just tell their story. They carry the proof of our shared blood, preserved through generations of Keepers until this moment. Harrison Wells sank into a chair, the fight leaving him as he finally understood. His own grandmother had been the Keeper before Eleanor, though she had never told him. He had spent his life fighting against a heritage that was fundamentally part of him. The Heritage Center's inauguration became something more than a historical commemoration. As the truth spread through the gathered crowd, people began discovering connections they had never known existed. Family trees were redrawn, artificial barriers crumbled, and Clara and Sarah's vision of unity finally emerged into the light. Maya and Malik stood with their grandmother Eleanor, the pendants still glowing softly around their necks. They had been born to reveal this truth, their unique connection to Clara and Sarah's memories making them the perfect bridges between past and present. The Keeper's role was ending because it had served its purpose. The families were remembering who they truly were, and no force could bury that truth again. As the sun set over Willow Grove, its light catching the restored glass of the conservatory, the gathered descendants of Clara and Sarah, now understanding they were all descendants of both women, began to share stories that had been hidden for generations. The Heritage Center would stand as more than a museum or community space. It would be a place where the artificial barriers between families could continue to dissolve, where the vision of unity that had been hidden for so long could finally flourish in the open air. The twins smiled at each other, their role as catalysts for this revelation complete. They had known, from their very first dreams of Willow Grove, that this day would come. Clara and Sarah's legacy wasn't just in the buildings they had preserved or the networks they had created. It was in the blood of their descendants, finally awakening to the truth of their shared heritage.